Hey friends, tonight we slip quietly into a world you've only glimpsed in movies and dusty history books. You're waking up in a small medieval village somewhere in Europe, the kind of place where life is measured, not in hours but in roosters crowing and church bells tolling. The morning air is sharp with cold, damp from the night's dew, and you can hear the shuffle of animals in the byre. Your bed is nothing glamorous, just a lumpy mattress of straw, prickly against your skin, and covered by a coarse wool blanket that smells faintly of smoke from last night's fire. You probably won't survive this for long, but hey, you're here, so let's make the best of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. So drop your location in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is how much earlier people rise here. Dawn isn't just a poetic concept. It's the alarm clock of the Middle Ages. Roosters crow insistently, as if they've got a contract to annoy you. Dogs bark at nothing in particular. Somewhere, a baby is already crying, and you hear the muffled clatter of a bucket being lowered into a well. There's no snooze button, you're awake, like it or not. You sit up, brush straw from your tunic, and shuffle to the door of your cottage. It's low, so you duck, and you immediately step into mud. No sidewalks, no nice paving stones, just good honest muck. Chickens scatter around your feet, and you remind yourself that shoes were optional in this world. People often went barefoot unless they needed to show off in town. The air smells strongly of wood smoke. Every house in this village of maybe a few dozen families has a fire burning, not because people are especially cozy, but because it's survival. Without fire, you're freezing, your food spoils, and your light disappears. The smoke clings to everything: your hair, your blanket, even your breakfast. You'll get used to it eventually, but right now it stings your nose. As you stretch your limbs, you glance around at the village layout. Houses are small, wattle and daub walls smeared with clay. Thatched roofs that would give modern fire marshals a heart attack. The ground is uneven, trodden by animals as much as humans. Pigs roam freely, rooting in the dirt for scraps. A cow lowing nearby makes it clear that livestock and people live closer together than you'd like. In fact, many families share their one room. Homes with animals during winter. The warmth from a cow or a few goats is better than nothing. Historians still argue whether this close proximity was a clever survival strategy, or just a breeding ground for disease. But the smell leaves little debate. There's no privacy here. Everyone knows who woke late, whose roof leaks, and whose hens haven't laid eggs this week. The village runs on gossip as much as it runs on barley and oats. Your neighbors nod to you as they stir from their homes too, some already heading to the fields with tools slung over shoulders. Work doesn't wait, the first mainstream fact to tuck away. The vast majority of medieval Europeans were peasants, bound to the land and the rhythm of agriculture. About 90% of the population lived rural lives like this: no castles, no knights in shining armor, just mud, bread, and sweat. Forget the Hollywood vision. This is the ordinary heartbeat of the Middle Ages. But here's a quirky tidbit. Not all mornings started with roosters and smoke. Some villages had professional knocker-uppers, people who would tap on windows with sticks to wake folks for work. It's a job you probably wouldn't brag about on LinkedIn, but it existed, especially in later centuries. And it shows how structured life could get. You take a moment to look east. The sun is finally pushing its way above the horizon. streaking the sky with pale gold. The church tower a wooden one here. Nothing fancy catches the first light. It's the tallest building in sight, reminding everyone that even the rhythm of your day is tied to religion. Bells will soon toll for morning prayers, whether you're ready or not. You shiver a little, partly from cold, partly from hunger. Your stomach growls. Breakfast won't be glamorous, but it's coming. Still, you can't help but notice the village's strange charm. It's messy, yes, and it's hard, but it's also alive. Voices rise, chickens squawk, doors creak open, smoke twists into the sky. You're a part of this world now, woven into the tapestry of ordinary. Medieval life, and before we shuffle off to find food, here's your first little joke for the morning, if you think your roommate's bad. Imagine sharing a room with 6 siblings, 3 chickens, a goat, and your grandmother who snores louder than the church bell. Sweet dreams indeed, the day has only just begun. Your feet are cold, your hands are rough, but you've got work ahead of you. First, though, you'll need to break your fast. And in this world, that means bread and ale instead of lattes and cereal. Your stomach is already grumbling. And in this world, there's no refrigerator to raid, no toaster to pop, no coffee machine to gurgle awake. Breakfast comes slowly, the way everything here does. And it's centered on the same staples you'll taste again and again, bread and ale. You shuffle toward the hearth, the smoky heart of the cottage, where the last embers of last night's fire still glow faintly red. Someone in the family, probably, the one with the least power to argue, has already been tasked with coaxing the flames back to life. That means blowing gently until sparks catch, then adding dry twigs, then thicker wood until it's crackling again. No fire means no breakfast, and you're not about to chew raw grain. The bread waiting for you isn't soft, fluffy, or warm like what you might pick up at a bakery today. It's coarse, dense, and dark, baked with a mix of barley, rye, or oats. Wheat bread, the good white stuff, is for the wealthy. And unless you've stumbled into nobility overnight, you're not getting any of that. You break off a piece, it crumbles unevenly, leaving gritty bits of bran clinging to your fingers. And you chew, slowly, very slowly. The texture is more brick than bun, and if you're lucky, there aren't too many stones ground into the flour. Yes, stones, because medieval milling wasn't perfect. Tiny fragments from the grindstones sometimes ended up in the flour, and biting into them could wear down your teeth over time. Historians still argue whether tooth decay or tooth erosion from grit was the bigger problem. But either way, dentistry wasn't in your future. To wash it down, you reach for ale. Not a frothy pint from a pub, but a weak, thin drink brewed to be safer than water. Medieval wells weren't always pristine, so a little fermentation killed off dangerous microbes. The ale at breakfast is sometimes called small beer, low alcohol, enough to refresh without sending you into tipsy plowing accidents. Children drink it too, which feels shocking until you realize it's safer than water. You take a sip, and it tastes earthy, slightly sour, maybe a little stale. It's not Starbucks, but it's life. On lucky mornings, you might add something extra, a smear of butter if the cow's been kind, a slice of cheese if it hasn't already molded, or maybe an onion to chop up and mix in. Eggs are possible, but hens aren't laying year-round. Meat at breakfast, forget it. That's for feast days. Most days, bread and ale are your reliable, if uninspired, companions. The fire crackles a little stronger now, and you glance at the pot hanging from the iron hook over the hearth. Leftover pottage might still be inside. Pottage is the medieval all-purpose stew. The thing that simmers endlessly with whatever scraps and vegetables are on hand. Yesterday's dinner often becomes today's breakfast. And if you're lucky, today's lunch too. Each bowlful tastes slightly different, depending on what went into it. But it's always thick, mushy, and filling. Think of it as the oatmeal of the Middle Ages, except with more cabbage and far fewer cinnamon sprinkles. A quirky tidbit here. People sometimes flavored. They're bred with things like acorns or peas when grain was scarce. Imagine biting into a loaf and realizing it tastes faintly like bitter nuts. Not exactly the bakery treat you'd Instagram. The room around you is dim, lit mostly by the flicker of firelight, with smoke curling upward and escaping through a hole in the roof or not escaping at all, which is why your eyes sting. The smell of damp wool, smoke, and onions clings to every surface. Your family eats together, often from the same loaf or shared bowl. There's no separate plate for everyone. You dip your bread into the stew to soften it, then pass it along. Eating is quick, practical, and done sitting on wooden stools or even just on the ground. Conversation isn't lively banter about your dreams last night. It's about the work ahead, how the oats are growing, whether the pig is fattening well. If the Lord's tax collector is due soon, your modern brain might crave chatter. But this breakfast is more about fuel. Still, you can't help but chuckle at a small joke forming in your mind. Medieval breakfast was basically the same every day, which means you never had to ask, "What's for breakfast?" You already knew. That's one way to avoid arguments. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Bread really was the staple food of the medieval diet, often making up 70–80 of daily calories. Without it, survival would have been nearly impossible. And here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue about just how nutritious medieval diets were. Some suggest peasants lived on the brink of malnutrition, while others point out that seasonal vegetables, beans, and occasional meat may have provided a surprisingly balanced intake compared to modern processed diets. You finish your bread, wipe your fingers on your tunic, and take another sip of ale. It doesn't make you full, but it takes the edge off your hunger and gives you the energy to keep moving. The day waits outside, and it's not patient. Soon enough, you'll be bending your back in the fields, under the same sky that's seen countless mornings just like this one. So, with your belly lined by rough bread and sour ale, you stand, stretch, and shuffle toward the door. The village is stirring, tools are being gathered, and your turn to toil has come. It's time to head into the fields. You step outside, the chill morning air brushing against your face, and the fields stretch out before you like a never-ending quilt of earth and grass. The sun is higher now, though not warm enough to take the edge off. Mist still clings low over the ground, and the soil beneath your feet squelches with the weight of dew. You glance down at the tools you've carried, a wooden hoe, an iron-tipped plowshare, and the same pair of rough hands you'll keep using, season after season, until they're more callous than skin. Work in the fields isn't glamorous, it's grueling. Today's job might be turning over the soil for planting, pulling weeds from barley, or herding geese out of rows they've decided to claim as their personal buffet. Farming isn't optional here. It's survival. Everything you eat, everything your family eats, everything the lord of the manor demands as tax, it all comes from this patch of dirt. You bend your back, sink the hoe into the ground, and feel the dull ache ripple through your shoulders. Almost immediately, you're not alone out here. The fields are buzzing with activity. Men, women, and children all pitch in, because work doesn't respect age or gender. Little ones scatter behind, picking up stones or chasing birds, while older children carry water jugs or drive oxen. Women bend low to weed, skirts tucked out of the way, while men tug stubborn plows behind panting animals. It's communal, but it's also exhausting. And unlike the neat rows you might imagine, medieval fields are long. Narrow strips sometimes shared, sometimes open. Sometimes so muddy, you wonder if you're farming soil or soup. The soil itself is finicky. Some years it yields grain enough to feed everyone. Other years it sulks, and famine creeps in like a shadow. Historians still argue whether the medieval open field system was efficient genius or a hopelessly outdated method. But what you know is this: it's backbreaking either way. You pause to stretch and notice a flock of geese waddling boldly into the oats. With a muttered curse, you wave your arms and shoo them away. They honk indignantly, as though you violated some unwritten goose treaty. Keeping animals out of crops is a constant battle. Sheep nibble sprouts. Cows break fences, and pigs, well, pigs eat everything. A scarecrow helps, but honestly, so does a loud kid with a stick. Now, here's your mainstream historical fact. The backbone of medieval farming was the three-field system. Land was divided into three parts: one for autumn crops like wheat or rye, one for spring crops like oats or peas, and one left fallow to recover. This rotation meant better soil fertility and a more stable food supply, even if it meant you always felt like you were one bad harvest away from disaster. A quirky tidbit, though: sometimes villagers fertilized fields with manure, which makes sense, but they also experimented with stranger things. There are records of people trying fish heads, ash, and even seaweed if they lived near the coast. Imagine explaining to your neighbors why your cabbages smell like low tide. You dig your hoe into the soil again, sweat already beading on your brow even though the morning's still cool. Time feels strange here, no clocks ticking, no hourly schedules. Work is measured by the sun's position and the weight in your muscles. When the shadow of the church tower leans just so, you know it's midday. Until then, you keep going. Occasionally, your eyes wander toward the Lord's manor house on the distant hill, the one with stone walls while you live in mud and straw. That manor controls your life more than you'd like to admit. Part of your harvest will be taken as rent or tax. You don't own the land until you borrow it, tied by obligation, tradition, and feudal law. You might grumble, but refusing isn't an option. The system has kept people in line for centuries, and yet there's a strange rhythm to it all. Your body bends, straightens, bends again. The earth opens, seeds scatter, and you tamp the soil back down. Birds call overhead, children laugh between chores, and even the oxen seem to groan in unison with you. This is life, not fast, not flashy, but steady. You pause to sip more ale from a leather flask you brought along. The taste is still sour, but it helps wash the dust from your throat. A neighbor jokes that if you spill enough on the soil, the crops might grow drunk and dance their way out of the ground. You laugh, though you suspect if cabbages started dancing, you'd be more horrified than amused. Historians like to debate big things. Was medieval farming truly efficient? Was it progress compared to the Romans or a step backward? They still argue over whether peasants were crushed by endless labor or whether communal life brought unexpected joys. You, standing here with dirt under your nails and aching muscles, know only this: it's tiring, but it's also everything. Without this field, you have nothing. One more joke to lighten your mood. You thought your gym membership was tough. Try medieval CrossFit. It's basically squats, lunges, and deadlifts, but with mud, geese, and a side of hunger. The sun climbs higher. You look over your shoulder at the strip you've already worked. Neat furrows lining the earth like stripes in a brown blanket. The day isn't even half over, and you've got more soil to turn, more weeds to yank, more animals to chase. But for now, you wipe your brow, straighten your back, and tell yourself, just one row at a time. The morning's labor in the fields leaves your back sore, your hands blistered, and your stomach muttering for more than bread and ale. By midday, though, you get a little change of scenery. The fields may belong to everyone, but the village itself hums with other trades. You wander down the muddy lane, past low cottages with thatched roofs, toward the clinking, thumping, and humming of craftsmen at work. This is where survival depends not on soil, but on skill. The first sound that grabs your ear is the ringing clang of the blacksmith's hammer. You duck into his dark, smoky forge, where the air is thick with heat and the smell of scorched metal. Sparks leap like fireflies every time the hammer strikes. The blacksmith is bare-armed, sweat running down his brow, muscles straining as he pounds glowing iron on the anvil. He's shaping a plowshare now, something every farmer depends on. Tomorrow, it might be horseshoes, hinges, or even weapons if the Lord calls for them. Blacksmiths are indispensable. Part engineer, part magician, bending iron into the bones of daily life. Step outside, and you hear the soft rhythm of the weaver's shuttle. In a small cottage, the weaver sits hunched over a wooden loom, feet pumping pedals while hands guide threads back and forth, back and forth. Wool, spun from village sheep, stretches into rough cloth, the kind you'll end up wearing. It's itchy, yes, but it keeps you warm. Dyes are expensive bright blues, deep reds, golden yellows, so most people wear shades of brown and gray. Every so often, you see a splash of color, maybe for Sunday best, and it feels like a festival of fabric. Further down, the potter's wheel spins. Clay slaps wetly, shaped into bowls, jugs, and cooking pots. You watch the potter's hands thick with dried mud, pinch and coax the clay until it rises, like magic, into a usable form. These vessels are fragile, easy to break, but they're the backbone of medieval kitchens. No fancy china here, just sturdy earthenware that can withstand heat and clumsy hands. You pass the carpenter's workshop next, where the scent of fresh wood cuts through the air. He planes planks, carves handles for tools, or builds carts creaking down the lane. His shop smells better than any other, like a pine forest. Clean and sharp, and you wonder briefly if medieval villagers noticed it too, or if the scent was so ordinary they barely thought about it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval villages were more than just farmers. Craftsmen formed the vital middle of the community, supplying everything from tools to clothing to storage vessels. Even in tiny settlements, some level of specialization existed, though larger towns, of course, offered far greater variety. A quirky tidbit: medieval craftsmen sometimes marked their work with tiny symbols or signatures hidden on the base of a pot, carved into the handle of a tool, or woven into the edge of a cloth. It was a way to say, "I made this," centuries before brand logos and trademarks. Imagine finding a medieval version of Nike's swoosh hidden on a wooden spoon. You pause near the tannery and instantly regret it. The smell is overwhelming. Leather is vital: shoes, belts, saddles, gloves, but the process of making it is stomach-turning. Skins soak in vats of urine and dung, scraped and stretched until they're workable. You wrinkle your nose and joke silently that medieval villagers must have built up immune systems strong enough to wrestle bears. Still, without leather, you'd be barefoot in the mud. Historians still argue whether village craftsmen worked mostly for subsistence trading directly with neighbors, or whether they participated in larger market economies that tied even small villages into a wider web of commerce. What you know, standing here, is that every clang, every scrape, every hum matters. Without them, your life would be harder than it already is the afternoon. Hum builds, hammers striking, looms clicking, clay thudding, saws rasping. Each craft is a rhythm in the village's song. Children dart between workshops, carrying messages or small bundles of goods. Dogs bark at carts. A goose wanders boldly into the carpenter's shop, honking at a wood shaving as if it's offended. You lean against a post, watching the flow of life, and realize that although farming feeds the belly, craftsmanship gives the village shape. It's the difference between eating stew from your hand and from a bowl, between trudging barefoot and wearing leather shoes. These small trades turn mud into survival. And here's your joke for this stretch. You thought IKEA assembly instructions were confusing? Try explaining to a medieval carpenter how you want a bookshelf that fits. Aesthetic minimalist vibes. He'll probably hand you a stool and say, "There, it holds things." By the time you finish wandering, the sun is beginning to tilt westward. The clang of the blacksmith, the whir of the weaver, the slap of clay all fade into a familiar background chorus. You're reminded that while farming may dominate life here, the crafts keep it spinning. Tools break, pots shatter, cloth tears without these trades. The fields themselves would falter. Your stomach reminds you it's time to think about the market, where you might trade, haggle, or simply gawk at goods you'll never afford. With mud on your boots and the echo of hammers still in your ears, you drift toward the heart of village commerce. The village lane opens into a wide patch of trampled earth, and you know you've arrived at market day. The air is instantly different, livelier, louder, buzzing with the kind of energy that only comes when people, goods, and gossip all collide in one place. A dog darts between legs, children squeal, and someone is already shouting the price of salted herring. Before you even spot the stall, you step forward, swept into the current of humanity. And suddenly, the mud doesn't feel quite as heavy under your boots. The stalls themselves are simple rough wooden tables or carts, some covered with canvas awnings, others just left open to the sky. On them are laid the essentials of life, though not always in abundance. The first one you pass is stacked with baskets of fish. They glisten in the weak sun, their smell so strong you wonder if it's the same scent that clings to the fisherman himself. Salted cod, dried herring, sometimes eels wriggling in tubs. This is the medieval equivalent of fast food. Fish is everywhere because, thanks to religious rules, meatless days are frequent, and the church calendar has more fasting days than you'd prefer. Next to the fishmonger stands a cloth merchant. Bolts of coarse wool spill across the table, gray, brown, and the occasional splash of dyed red or blue. Your fingers itch to touch them, though you know you can't afford the brightest shades. Those are for merchants or minor nobles. For most villagers, the practical browns and dull greens will have to do. Still, it's fun to imagine yourself strutting in a cloak of crimson, even if you'd probably just trip over the hem in the mud. The air is thick with other scents, now spices, though faint and rare. A traveling merchant has brought small bags of pepper, cinnamon, and maybe even saffron. You lean close, and your nose tingles at the sharp aroma. The prices are outrageous. You could trade a week's wages for a pinch of pepper, and saffron costs enough. to make you think twice about how much flavor really matters. Historians still argue whether common villagers ever used spices beyond salt and herbs, or whether that was purely the playground of the rich, judging by the grumbling peasants walking past the spice stall. The debate might lean toward the latter. A quirky tidbit here: one of the hottest medieval market items wasn't even edible. It was beeswax candles. They burned cleaner and brighter than tallow candles made from animal fat. And though they were expensive, people loved them for church services or special occasions. Imagine your excitement at splurging on a candle instead of, say, Netflix. The market isn't just about buying and selling, it's about watching and listening. A man stands on a crate, shouting news from a nearby town. Another plays a lute, the notes jangling merrily above the chatter. A juggler tosses wooden balls into the air, while a monkey on a leash dances for coins. Children tug at your sleeve, offering roasted chestnuts, and you briefly wonder if they're selling them or just trying to pick your pocket. Here's your mainstream historical fact: markets were the lifeblood of medieval communities, not only for trade, but also for social interaction. Villagers who rarely traveled got their news, their entertainment, and even their spouses from gatherings like these. In many towns, the right to hold a market was granted by royal charter, making it a big deal. No charter, no legal market. You linger at a stall selling pottery. Bowls, mugs, and jugs are stacked precariously, each one looking as if it's daring you to knock it over. The potter eyes you with suspicion, and you remember that, in some villages, breaking someone's goods meant paying for them whether you could afford to or not. You back away carefully, feeling clumsy already, and then, tucked between the fish stall and the cloth merchant, you spot something less practical, but deeply human: trinkets. Pewter brooches shaped like flowers, bone combs carved with tiny patterns, little knives with decorative handles. None of them are necessary for survival. Yet people lean close, bargaining, admiring. Survival might be bread and ale, but living requires a little beauty, even if it's just a comb to tidy your hair on festival days. Of course, the market also carries a darker edge. Watchmen prowl the edges, eyeing anyone who lingers too long near a stall without buying. Thieves are common here, and punishments are harsh. Stocks, whipping posts, even a severed ear displayed as a warning. You remind yourself to keep a hand on your purse, even if there's barely anything inside. You laugh quietly at a small joke forming in your mind. Medieval markets were basically the original. Shopping malls, loud, crowded, overpriced, and full of teenagers loitering. The only difference is that instead of a food court, you get a fish stall and some very judgmental geese. By the time the sun leans west, the market begins to thin. Goods are packed away, animals herded home, stalls dismantled until the next gathering. You step back, clutching whatever you manage to trade for maybe a hunk of cheese, maybe just a memory of the saffron you couldn't afford, and let the buzz fade into the evening. The village feels quieter now, the chatter replaced once again by the steady rhythm of ordinary life. Your feet carry you back toward the cottages, past the last lingering juggler, past the watchman yawning at his post. Soon you'll duck into a home again, to see what life is like when the door shuts, the fire burns low, and family gathers inside their smoky, crowded walls. The chatter of the market fades behind you, and you make your way back toward the cottages. Smoke rises in thin gray trails from the roofs, carrying with it the smell of burning wood, damp thatch, and boiled cabbage. You duck low beneath the crooked lintel of one small house, and suddenly you're inside a medieval home. No front porch, no foyer. No space to kick off muddy shoes, just one room. Dim and smoky, crowded with everything and everyone. The first thing that strikes you is how dark it is. There are no glass windows here, at least not for ordinary villagers. Instead, there's a tiny opening covered with oiled parchment or thin cloth, letting in a weak smear of daylight. Most of the illumination comes from the fire in the hearth, its smoke curling lazily upward, escaping through a hole in the roof. Sometimes it escapes. Sometimes it just clings to the rafters until your eyes water and your tunic smells like campfire for days. The hearth is the heart of the room. A heavy iron pot dangles from a hook, today simmering with pottage that smells of turnips and leeks. Maybe there's a scrap of pork bone floating inside if you're lucky. The fire does triple duty here, cooking, heating, and lighting. Families huddle close to it, not just to eat, but to stay alive through cold nights. When the wind slips through every crack in the walls themselves are rough, made of wattle and daub-woven wooden strips plastered with clay, straw, and sometimes manure to keep the drafts out. They're uneven, lumpy, and decorated not with paintings but with hanging tools. A drying bundle of herbs, or maybe a carved wooden cross. If you squint, you notice little crawling things in the cracks. Yes, the medieval home comes with free bugs. No exterminator required. Space is tight. Beds, if you can call them, that are wooden frames stuffed with straw, often shared by several family members. Parents might have one bed, children another, or everyone might just pile together, depending on the size of the family and the house. Privacy, forget it. You hear every snore, every cough, every whispered argument. And when winter bites hard, you might find a chicken or two tucked inside as well, because their body heat helps. You can laugh, but if you've ever fought over a blanket with your sibling, imagine adding a goat to the mix. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Most medieval peasants lived in simple one-room houses, with animals often sharing space in winter. The wealthier the peasant, the more likely they were to have a separate room or a loft. But the majority lived in these smoky, crowded huts. You look around and notice a small wooden table with uneven legs. Meals are eaten here when they're not eaten by the fire. A few stools are scattered about. Maybe a chest against the wall to store precious things like a cloak, a set of tools, or a little salt. Salt isn't just a seasoning here. It's practically treasure. It preserves meat, seasons bland food, and sometimes even serves as payment. A quirky tidbit, medieval people, sometimes smeared their walls with lime to keep insects away and brighten the room. The lime wash gave the interior a pale, chalky look, which must have felt almost luxurious compared to bare mud walls. Not every peasant bothered, but those who did could claim the medieval version of home improvement. The smell inside is a blend you'll never forget. Smoke, damp wool, earth, and whatever's cooking in the pot mingle together until it's hard to tell one from the other. The floor is beaten earth, strewn with rushes or straw that soak up spills and, well, other things. Every so often, the rushes are replaced, though probably not as often as you'd like. Historians still argue whether rush floors were relatively clean or whether they were basically medieval compost, heaps breeding fleas, judging by the itching in your ankles. You suspect the latter. The family around you carries on with their routines. A mother spins wool with a drop spindle, her fingers deftly twisting fibers into thread. A boy carves a wooden spoon, tongue poking out in concentration as his small knife scrapes the wood. An older man snores loudly on the straw bed, worn out from the fields. The baby cries, soothed with a lullaby that sounds more chant than song. Life hums here, close and constant. You can't help but smile at a small joke. Imagine inviting someone to your open-plan home. In the Middle Ages, they'd look around and say, "Yes, it's very open and very smoky." The more you sit in the dimness, the more you realize how different the rhythm of life is here. There's no flick of a switch to brighten the room, no heater to banish the chill. Every comfort is earned by chopping wood, fetching water, weaving cloth. You live shoulder to shoulder with your family, your animals, and your chores. And yet, somehow, the closeness carries its own warmth. The fire pops, sending sparks into the gloom. Someone ladles out a bowl of pottage, and you realize it's nearly time to eat again. The day has been long already, but meals anchor it, break it into manageable chunks. Soon, you'll taste what ordinary medieval dining is like, not feasts of kings and nobles, but the daily stews, breads, and salted scraps that keep villagers going. The ladle dips into the iron pot, and the smell of simmered leeks and turnips wafts through the smoky room. Someone passes you a rough wooden bowl, its surface uneven and stained from countless meals before. You tear off a chunk of coarse bread, dunk it into the thick pottage, and let it soften before chewing. Welcome to the medieval dinner table, though in truth, table is optional. Many families simply gather around the fire, bowls in hand, eating where there's space. The food is plain but filling. Today's pottage is a vegetable base, thickened with grains, perhaps barley or oats. A scrap of pork bone adds flavor, though the meat itself has long been gnawed away. On rare occasions, a bit of bacon or salted fish finds its way in, transforming the dish into a luxury. Most days, though, it's just vegetables, grains, and hope. The stew simmers endlessly, added to day by day. So it's less a recipe and more a culinary ongoing situation. Bread accompanies nearly every meal. It's dense, heavy, and sometimes flavored with herbs like parsley or sage. If your family is well off enough, there might be cheese on the table, sharp, crumbly, and often hard as a rock, requiring a good knife and stronger teeth. Milk is mostly for children or turned quickly into butter and cheese, since there are no refrigerators to keep it fresh. Now and then, though, meals rise above the everyday. Feast days mark the church calendar, and those are your chance to glimpse the extravagance, usually reserved for the wealthy. You've heard stories. Roasted swan carried in with feathers, still on for dramatic effect. Pies baked with live birds inside that would fly out when cut, yes. Really, and tables groaning with roasted venison, spiced stews, and glazed fruits. Of course you, a simple villager, would probably be stationed at the far edge of the hall, handed a ladle of thin stew while the nobles gnawed swan. But even hearing the music, smelling the spices, and catching a glimpse of the spectacle is enough to dazzle. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Feasts were a central feature of medieval life, tied to the religious calendar and often used to display wealth and power. Nobles competed to outdo each other with lavish spreads, while common folk participated in more modest but still meaningful village feasts. A quirky tidbit: one popular medieval dish was something called blancmange, a mixture of shredded chicken, rice, almonds, and sugar. It sounds elegant, but to peasants, it probably looked like someone spilled dessert into the stew pot. Imagine calling that fine dining. Of course, not every meal is so festive. You often eat with your hands, using bread as both plate and utensil. Trenchers' thick slabs of stale bread serve as edible dishes. soaking up juices before being eaten or tossed to the dogs. Spoons exist, carved from wood or bone. But forks, forget it. Forks don't become common in Europe until much later, and many considered them unnecessary or even suspicious. Fingers, a knife, and a hunk of bread are your tools. The drink on the table is, once again, ale. Wine is for the wealthy or for regions where vineyards thrive. But here, weak ale is the standard. Occasionally, cider makes an appearance if apples are plentiful, or mead if bees have been generous. Water, though technically everywhere, is treated with suspicion. Too risky. Historians still argue about just how monotonous the peasant diet really was. Some claim villagers ate the same stew for weeks, while others point to evidence of surprising variety berries gathered from hedgerows, wild herbs, mushrooms, and even occasional game snared from the forest, though poaching on the Lord's land was risky business. Perhaps the truth lies in between, mostly monotony. Sprinkled with fleeting delights, you pause to wipe stew from your chin and crack. A grin at the thought, in a way. Medieval dining was the original meal prep. Cook one pot of stew, keep adding to it, never stop. Congratulations, you're eating the same. Lunch on Wednesday that you started on Monday. Take that, modern Tupperware. As the family finishes eating, bowls are rinsed with a splash of ale or wiped with bread. Leftovers return to the pot for tomorrow. Bellies are fuller, if not fully satisfied, and the fire burns a little brighter as conversation stirs. Someone tells a story, someone hums a tune, and the smoky room feels briefly lighter. Your own stomach settles, heavy but warm. You lean back against the rough wall, licking breadcrumbs from your fingers. For a moment, you think you could drift off to sleep, but the day still holds more to see. Because outside, where the smoke drifts toward the sky, people are clothed not just in plain tunics, but in fabrics and fashions that tell their own stories. Soon, you'll step back into the muddy lane and see what it really means to dress for survival, or for show in the Middle Ages. You step outside again, full from pottage and bread, and the village greets you with a swirl of color, or, well, as much color as the Middle Ages usually offers. Most people wear shades of brown, gray, or faded green, their wool tunics stained with smoke and soil. It's not exactly a fashion runway, but still, clothing tells a story here. Each thread speaks of class, craft, and survival. You tug at your own tunic, rough wool scratching against your skin. It's homespun, dyed with cheap plant-based colors like onion skins or nettles, leaving it a dull earthy shade. Over it, you've got a simple belt of leather stiff, cracked and more practical than stylish. On your legs are hose, one on each leg, tied awkwardly at the waist with strings. Yes, they sag. Yes, they itch. And yes, people wore them anyway. Shoes, if you can call them that, are leather-turned shoes, stitched inside out and then flipped. They keep the mud off mostly, though they aren't built for comfort. You can't help but think medieval shoemakers might have been designing for hobbits narrow, flat, and destined to split if you step on too many rocks. Women's clothing looks similar in simplicity. Long woolen gowns, sometimes layered with aprons or over dresses, tied with woven belts. A linen wimple or veil covers hair, partly for modesty, partly to keep the ever-present smoke smell contained. Married women especially keep their heads covered. Bare hair is for the young or unmarried. You glance at the neat white cloth pinned under a chin, the way it frames a face, and realize it's more about social signals than fashion sense. The wealthy, though, dress like a different species entirely. On feast days, when nobles stride through the village or the Lord's family attends church, you see rich fabrics that make your jaw drop. Scarlet dyed from madder root, deep blues from woad, and most coveted of all, royal purple from imported dye. Silk gleams faintly in the light, smoother than anything you've ever touched. Fur trims cloak colors, not to keep warm, but to announce wealth. Even the cut of clothing differs. Longer tunics, sweeping sleeves. Tighter fits that require more fabric, and therefore more money. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Clothing in the Middle Ages was strictly tied to social status, and many regions had sumptuary laws that dictated what people could and could not wear. These laws weren't just fashion policing. They reinforced hierarchy, making sure peasants didn't dress above their station. A quirky tidbit: some medieval shoes were absurdly long-toed, with tips so extended they had to be tied to the leg with chains or cords. Called poulaines, they were popular among nobles, but to peasants, they probably looked ridiculous. Imagine trudging through mud with clown shoes. You notice how garments also reveal work. A carpenter's tunic is streaked with sawdust. A smith's apron blackened with soot. A shepherd's cloak dotted with burrs and wool fluff. Clothes double as a R-sum, announcing what you do before you open your mouth. Practical additions pouches. Knives, little bags dangle from belts, since pockets haven't been invented yet. If you want to carry something, it hangs from your waist. Children wear miniature versions of adult clothes, tunics, hose. Little dresses, though theirs, are often patched to the point of being more patch than fabric. Babies are swaddled tightly in strips of cloth, bundled like burritos, their tiny heads peeking out. Fashion doesn't leave much room for cuteness here, though you do spot the occasional attempt at decoration, a colored ribbon, a bead or embroidery stitched with surprising care. Historians still argue whether peasants really wore drab colors exclusively, or whether they sometimes splurged on brighter dyes when they could. Evidence of dyed threads suggests that while the rich had the monopoly on exotic hues, the poor weren't entirely colorless either. Perhaps your own tunic once held a richer shade, now dulled by mud, sun, and endless washings. You chuckle at the thought. Medieval fashion might sound plain, but at least you never had to agonize over what to wear. Your options were brown tunic A or brown tunic B. Problem solved. Despite its simplicity, clothing carries symbolism. A pilgrim wears a scallop shell on his hat, marking his journey. A bride dons a wreath of flowers on her head, not a white gown. A monk's rough habit signals devotion, while a knight's surcoat blazes with his family crest. You realize fashion here isn't about trends. It's about identity, faith, and rank. The wind picks up, tugging at your scratchy sleeves. You pull your belt tighter, tuck your knife back at your side, and glance once more at the nobles' colors flickering near the church. Their silks and furs glitter faintly against the mud-brown backdrop of the village. But you know that when the bells ring, when prayers begin, when festivals rise, everyone, noble and peasant alike, will kneel on the same straw-strewn floor. And with that thought, your feet begin to carry you toward the church itself, where faith weaves just as tightly into daily life as wool threads into your tunic. The church bells toll, heavy and solemn, their sound rolling across the fields like ripples in water. You follow the slow stream of villagers toward the stone building at the center of everything the church. Squat and gray, its walls rough, but its presence unshakable. Faith isn't just part of medieval life. It is medieval life, stitched into each hour, each habit, each hope. You step inside, and the first thing that hits you is the dimness. Candles flicker in iron holders, casting trembling shadows along the stone walls. The air smells of beeswax, damp stone, and incense, thick enough to make you cough if you aren't used to it. The floor is packed earth or uneven stone, covered with straw to soften footsteps. No pews here, just open space, where the villagers cluster, shifting from foot to foot during the long services. You cross yourself, mostly because everyone else does, and settle near the back. The priest begins the Latin chants, and though you don't understand most of the words, the rhythm soothes you. It doesn't matter if you know the language. The ritual itself speaks louder. Bells ring, bread is lifted, and you watch as villagers bow their heads, whisper prayers, and clutch at small relics hanging from their necks. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Catholic Church in the Middle Ages dominated not only spiritual life, but also education, law, and even politics. It was the institution that touched every corner of daily existence, from birth to burial. Yet faith wasn't just sermons. The church calendar dictated when you fasted, when you feasted, when you worked less, and when you prayed more. Lent, Advent, Easter, Christmas, each season marked by rules and rituals that gave rhythm to lives otherwise, shaped by weather and work. A quirky tidbit: some relics became surprisingly bizarre. One church claimed to have feathers from the Archangel Gabriel's wings, another a bottle of the Virgin Mary's milk. People traveled miles just to see them, and whether they believed or simply hoped, they dropped coins into the church's collection box. Festivals, though, are where faith meets fun. You remember the Feast of Corpus Christi, when townspeople dressed in costumes, paraded through the streets, and performed plays retelling Bible stories. Children scampered underfoot. Vendors sold treats, and for once, everyone forgot the drudgery of the fields. Some days were solemn. Others were wild. Carnival before Lent was practically an excuse for chaos, with masks, dancing, and mischief. But faith isn't only celebration. It's fear, too. You've heard whispers about sin, hellfire, and purgatory. The priest warns of indulgences pay for forgiveness, or of penance through fasting and prayer. For the sick, charms and relics are pressed into hands. The belief in spiritual healing as strong as any herbal cure. Historians still argue whether peasants truly believed every word the church taught, or whether they blended Christianity with older folk traditions. Maybe the villagers prayed sincerely on Sunday, then tucked protective charms into their tunics on Monday. Perhaps faith was a spectrum, part devotion, part tradition, part survival. You glance at the crucifix, its carved figure worn smooth by countless gazes. The chant drones on, your knees ache from kneeling, and your mind wanders to lighter thoughts. You stifle a yawn. Don't worry, you aren't the only one. Even in the 12th century, people found sermons long. At least you can whisper to yourself, "Yes, Father, I definitely absorbed that Latin phrase." It probably means don't fall asleep in church. As the service ends, villagers spill back into the sunlight, crossing themselves once more. You walk with them, blinking against the sudden brightness. The church looms behind you, its bells quiet now, but its power still humming in your chest. Faith isn't just Sunday, it's daily. Hourly, unshakable, your stomach grumbles, reminding you that prayer doesn't fill a belly. But before you trudge back to fields or hearth, there's another side of medieval life calling: how people played, laughed, and passed time when work and prayer allowed a sliver of rest. Games, after all, are timeless. The day stretches on, and for once, you're not trudging to the fields. not bent over a loom, not standing through a sermon. Instead, the village hums with laughter and noise, the unmistakable sound of people, actually enjoying themselves. Leisure in the Middle Ages isn't quite the Netflix and chill you're used to, but it has its own rough charm. At the edge of the green, a group of children kicks around a ball. Not a modern leather one, but a pig's bladder, inflated and tied off, bouncing unpredictably across the grass. It squeaks when struck, wobbles off course, and occasionally bursts with a wet pop, ending the game abruptly. Still, it's a favorite, and you join in for a moment, laughing as the ball smacks against your shin. This, believe it or not, is one ancestor of football. Nearby, men gather around a makeshift board scratched into the dirt. They toss dice, small carved cubes clattering against stone, the excitement in their voices rising with every roll. Gambling is technically frowned upon, but that doesn't stop anyone. Coins, buttons, even a hunk of bread might change hands. And if you're unlucky, well, at least it's only bread. Unless you bet the family goat, never bet the goat. Here's your mainstream historical fact, medieval. Leisure often revolved around simple, communal games, dice, backgammon known as tables, and rough ball games that later evolved into modern sports like football and rugby. Of course, not all games are for the peasants. Nobles enjoy hunting, falconry, and jousts. Picture yourself with a hawk perched on your wrist, its sharp eyes scanning for prey. Impressive, yes, but expensive. For common folk, amusement is humbler, but no less spirited. Wrestling, tug of war, or just singing bawdy. Songs at the tavern after a pint of ale, that's entertainment. Speaking of taverns, you slip inside one as the sun lowers. The air is thick with smoke, laughter, and the smell of ale. Wooden mugs slam on tables. A fiddler scratches out a tune in the corner, and someone claps in rhythm. For a moment, the weight of daily work lifts, replaced by warmth, song, and companionship. A quirky tidbit, medieval bowling existed. Players rolled a ball toward wooden pins, often outdoors on uneven ground. Records show that in some towns, bowling became so popular it distracted men from archery practice, which was mandatory for defense. Imagine a sheriff scolding you. Put down the pins. Pick up your bow. Not all leisure is rowdy. Some villagers carve small wooden toys, fashion whistles from reeds, or simply gather to tell stories by the hearth. You listen to a tale of knights and dragons, passed down through generations. The storyteller's voice rises and falls, and you realize these tales aren't just amusement, they're cultural glue, linking the present to a shared past. Historians still argue whether peasants truly had significant leisure time, or whether these glimpses were rare breaks stolen from endless toil. Some evidence suggests workdays were long, but punctuated with feast days, fairs and community events that balanced the drudgery. Perhaps the truth lies in between, exhausting labor, yes, but also bursts of joy, laughter, and play. You step outside again, the evening air cooling your flushed cheeks. In the distance, children chase fireflies, their giggles carried on the breeze. For a moment, you feel it, the universal hum of human joy. Games may change, but the urge to laugh, play, and forget life's weight, that's eternal. Still, the path ahead doesn't always lead to merriment. Sometimes it winds across dangerous roads, dusty trails, and pilgrim shrines. Travel in the Middle Ages is a gamble all its own, and your feet itch to wander further. Your feet ache from standing in the tavern. But before you can think of rest, your eyes wander toward the horizon. Roads stretch out beyond the village, rutted with cartwheels, winding between fields and forests. Travel in the Middle Ages isn't glamorous, it's dangerous, unpredictable, and exhausting, but it's also essential. Pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, messengers, and the occasional dreamer all find themselves trudging these same paths. Tonight, you imagine yourself among them. The dirt road crunches beneath your worn shoes. There are no smooth highways here, just muddy tracks that turn into rivers when it rains. Bridges, when they exist at all, are often wooden and rickety. Sometimes you're left fording streams, praying your bundle doesn't wash away. And then there are bandits lurking in forests, ready to relieve you of your coin, cloak, or maybe even your shoes. Still, travel has its allure. Pilgrimage is one of the most common reasons to leave home. You picture yourself clutching a scallop shell, the badge of those who've walked to Santiago de Compostela. Every pilgrim carries tokens, badges of saints, little crosses, even bits of parchment said to grant protection. Pilgrimage isn't just spiritual, it's social too. Roads become meeting grounds for strangers, united in prayer, blisters, and the hope that their souls shine brighter for the journey. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Pilgrimage was essential practice in medieval Christianity, with roots stretching across Europe to Rome, Canterbury, Jerusalem, and Santiago. These journeys could last weeks, months, or even years. Merchants travel as well, their carts piled high with good salt, spices, cloth, and wine. Town markets thrive because of their movement. You imagine brushing past a merchant selling pepper, its sharp scent unfamiliar and almost shocking, while another offers silks shimmering with impossible colors. Trade weaves the medieval world together, thread by thread, route by route. A quirky tidbit: medieval travel guides existed. Some were lists of safe inns, shrines, and holy sites, like proto-Lonely Planet books. Of course, instead of best restaurants, they offered warnings like beware of wolves in this forest, or the local innkeeper waters down his ale. Practical advice, if not 5-star reviews. Travel isn't only about pilgrimage or profit. Some wanderers roam simply because they have no choice. Soldiers march when summoned. Minstrels move from castle to castle, trading songs for food. Vagabonds drift along, carrying all they own on their backs. Roads are as much about survival as adventure. Historians still argue whether most peasants ever traveled far from their birthplace, or if the majority lived and died within a day's walk of their home. Some evidence points to surprising mobility, especially during times of famine, war, or opportunity, while other records show villagers who never strayed beyond their parish. Perhaps you'd have been both, rooted in home, but always aware of roads leading outward. You pause at a crossroads, imagining yourself choosing paths. To the left, the market town, bustling and noisy, with goods you've never dreamed of. To the right, the shrine, where pilgrims light candles and murmur prayers. Behind you, the safety of your village. Ahead, uncertainty, risk, and maybe a story worth telling. And just to keep you grounded in medieval reality, no. There are no snack stands, no gas stations, no hotels with fluffy pillows. If you're lucky, you sleep on a tavern bench. If you're unlucky, you curl under a hedge, your stomach growling and your cloak damp with dew. Travel, medieval style, is very much pack your patience and hope you don't die. As night falls, the road stretches into shadows, the forest murmuring with hidden noises. You pull your cloak tight, your feet dragging, your mind buzzing with both fear and awe. Tomorrow's dawn might bring a holy shrine, a bustling fair, or simply another muddy path. Either way, Travel has reshaped you, pulled you from the village into a wider, wilder world. And when you finally return home, dusty and sore, you'll find yourself listening closer to the gossip in the marketplace. Because news and rumors carry as far, and sometimes faster, than any traveler's feet, the moment you step back into the village after your imagined pilgrimage. The first thing that greets you isn't silence or peace, it's chatter. Everywhere you turn, people are talking. News, rumors, and whispered secrets are the heartbeat of medieval life. Without newspapers, radios, or TikTok to doomscroll, you rely on word of mouth. And honestly, it's juicier than you'd expect. On the green, a group of women gather at the well, buckets in hand. The water sloshes, but so do the tongues. You catch snippets. A neighbor's cow wandered off again. A young man asked the blacksmith's daughter for her hand, and the miller, oh, don't even get started on him, might be skimming extra grain. It's not idle talk. Gossip is information currency, vital for knowing who's trustworthy, who's in debt, and who might be hiding something. Here's your mainstream historical fact in the absence of formal news systems. Gossip, proclamations, and traveling messengers spread information. Town criers literally shouted the latest edicts or announcements in the streets, ensuring even the illiterate knew what the king demanded. But gossip isn't just about neighbors. Travelers bring news of wars, strange customs, and distant lands. Imagine a weary pilgrim recounting a tale of seeing relics in Rome, or a merchant boasting about spices in Venice. You'd listen wide-eyed, the world beyond your village growing larger with every story. Of course, not every tale is true. Did the next town really discover a dragon's nest? Probably not, but you lean in anyway. A quirky tidbit: medieval people believed rumors could carry magical weight. Words once spoken might influence fate. Some even swore gossip could cause illness or bad luck. Which makes you wonder, should you have repeated that thing about the miller's grain too late? Inside the tavern, gossip grows louder with ale. Men argue about taxes, soldiers share boasts from campaigns, and the bard strums a lute while slipping sly commentary into his verses. Songs themselves act as carriers of news verses, mocking nobles, praising saints, or satirizing scandals. If you ever hear a cheeky ballad about a nobleman losing his pants in a hunt, know it's half entertainment, half headline. Historians still argue whether gossip was primarily a harmless pastime or a dangerous tool of social control. Some suggest it kept communities tight-knit, policing behavior without written law. Others point out it could ruin reputations unfairly, branding someone dishonest or sinful based on nothing more than whispers. In either case, you'd be foolish not to pay attention. Gossip is survival. At the marketplace, the hum grows louder still. Merchants swap rumors about road conditions and wars, while villagers spread tales they heard from passing peddlers. A new tax might be announced, or news from the king's court might trickle down in half-true fragments. By the time it reaches your ears, it's probably twisted beyond recognition. Think of it like medieval telephone, except the stakes are higher and no one laughs at the garbled message. And here's a joke to soften things. If you ever hear someone say, "Trust me, my cousin's friend's brother swore it was true," you've basically stumbled into the medieval version of an online conspiracy thread. As night deepens, gossip drifts like smoke from hearth to hearth. Neighbors huddle by firesides, swapping stories under the crackle of flames. Some are harmless, some are scandalous, and some are just strange enough to keep. You awake wondering if maybe, just maybe, that dragon's nest could be real. You curl into your straw bed, the whispers still echoing in your head. Tomorrow, someone will share a fresh tale, a rumor from the next village, or a scandal that makes everyone lean closer. And while the truth might be murky, one thing's clear: in a world without printed headlines, the spoken word rules, but not every story is told in whispers. Some are performed loudly, with masks, songs, and costumes. The stage calls, and tomorrow you'll find yourself swept into the strange, colorful world of medieval performance. The sun dips low, and the village green is transformed into something magical. No longer just a patch of grass for markets and grazing. Animals, it becomes a stage. The scent of smoke drifts from torches. Laughter ripples through the crowd, and for once, everyone gathers not to labor or gossip, but to watch and listen. Performance in the Middle Ages is both entertainment and education. And tonight, you're swept into its glow. A troupe of traveling players arrives, their wagon creaking with costumes, masks, and props. These actors are wanderers, moving from village to village, bringing stories where few books exist. You squeeze forward, the press of neighbors around you, eager to see what unfolds. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval drama began as religious plays, often performed in churches or churchyards, reenacting biblical stories like the Nativity or the Passion. Over time, these mystery plays expanded into elaborate cycles, with entire towns staging them on wagons that rolled from street to street. Imagine your whole village acting out creation, Noah's Ark, and Judgment Day across a single summer week. But not all performances are solemn. Tonight, the players begin with a comic farce. One actor dons a ridiculous mask. Another pretends to be a bumbling servant. And soon the crowd roars with laughter as pies are stolen. Trousers fall down, and someone gets tricked into kissing a goat. High art? Maybe not. Entertaining? Absolutely. A quirky tidbit. Medieval performers sometimes used pig bladders filled with air or peas as slapstick props. Smack one on someone's head, and you've got instant comedy. Picture a medieval Looney Tunes, but with more manure jokes. You notice children wide-eyed at the spectacle, their mouths hanging open. For many, this is their first taste of theater, a living, breathing story unfolding before them. Illiteracy is no barrier. The actors use gestures, songs, and exaggerated voices to carry the tale. Even if you don't catch every word, the meaning is clear. Historians still argue whether theater was primarily meant to teach religious morals or to entertain the masses with humor and spectacle. Evidence shows both purposes tangled. Together, holy lessons, mingled with jokes about greedy innkeepers or nagging wives. Maybe the church tolerated the laughter because, in the end, the message still reached the people. As the performance continues, minstrels step forward, plucking lutes and fiddles. Songs weave through the air ballads of knights and maidens, laments of lost love, cheeky verses mocking lords who drink too much wine. Music carries stories where words alone can't. You sway gently, caught in the rhythm. And then comes the puppet show. Yes, puppets existed, and medieval crowds adored them. Tiny figures on strings act out scenes with exaggerated movements, their squeaky voices bringing delight. Imagine being captivated by a wooden knight bravely toppling a dragon no bigger than your hand. Simple, but magical. You glance at your neighbors, faces glowing in torchlight, united in laughter and awe. Performance is more than pastime. It's a glue that binds community, a mirror reflecting both faith and folly. Tonight, for a few fleeting hours, toil and hunger vanish, replaced by shared wonder. A final jest from the players leaves. The crowd howling. A trickster priest trips over his robes, spilling wine everywhere. The actors bow, coins clink into their box, and the wagon creaks away toward the next town. Tomorrow, they'll repeat the cycle, carrying joy and laughter to strangers. As the torches burn low, you wander home, your mind replaying the scenes. Performance has painted color onto the grayness of daily life, showing you a world larger, brighter, and funnier than you dared imagine. And yet, beneath the laughter, there's always the shadow of endings. Every life, no matter how filled with work, games or plays, must eventually close its curtain, and so, as you settle into your straw bed, your thoughts drift toward what comes after the final act: death, burial, and the memory left behind. The laughter from the puppet show fades, and with it comes the quiet reminder that all stories end. In the Middle Ages, death isn't an abstract idea or a faraway concept. It's as much a part of daily life as baking bread or hauling water. You can't go a week without being reminded: the old, the young, the noble, the poor, everyone eventually takes their turn. And tonight, you walk through that solemn journey. It begins with the illness. There are no hospitals, no modern medicines, just herbs, prayers, and the hope that your body fights through. A fever rises, the village healer mutters charms, and neighbors gather at your bedside whispering. You feel the cool cloth pressed to your forehead, the flicker of candlelight, the soft chant of a priest reading psalms. Sometimes people recover. Sometimes they don't. Here's your mainstream historical fact: mortality. Rates were staggeringly high in the Middle Ages. Diseases like dysentery, plague, and tuberculosis claimed countless lives. And even a simple cut could become fatal without antibiotics. Life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years. Though if you survived childhood, you had a decent chance of living longer. When death comes, it isn't hidden away. Your body is washed by neighbors, wrapped in cloth, and placed where people can pay their respects. The scent of incense mingles with the earthy smell of wood smoke. Candles flicker, and prayers murmur like background music. Death is a public event, not a private one. Children are present, not shielded. After all, they've seen livestock die. They've seen famine take friends. It's part of their world. A quirky tidbit: some medieval people believed that if you died with your eyes open, your soul might escape improperly. So family members would gently close the eyelids, sometimes even tying them shut, to keep you looking peaceful. The burial comes swiftly. The church bell tolls, the village gathers, and your coffin, if you can afford one, is carried on shoulders to the graveyard beside the church. The ground is cold, the shovel scrapes, and the earth welcomes another villager home. Headstones, if they exist at all, are plain. For many, just a wooden cross marks the spot, fading with time. Historians still argue whether medieval people feared death more than we do today, or whether they accepted it more calmly because it was so present. Some sources suggest a serene familiarity, while others reveal a deep terror of judgment and damnation. Perhaps, like now, it depended on the person. But death isn't just about endings, it's about remembrance. Prayers for the dead echo in church masses, candles burn in memory, and names are spoken so souls may rest easier. You imagine villagers whispering your name years later, asking a priest to say a mass on your behalf. In that way, you linger. The medieval obsession with the memento mori, the reminder that death comes for all, is woven into art and daily thought. Skulls carved into church walls, poems about the dance of death, even hourglasses reminding you that your time slips like sand. Grim, yes, but also grounding. If you know your end is certain, maybe you laugh louder, work harder, or pray more fervently. And just when you think you've shaken the solemn mood, here's a dash of medieval humor. Some villagers told jokes about death. One tale goes that when a miser died, he was buried face down so he could keep digging toward hell where he belonged. Dark comedy, but comedy nonetheless. As night falls, you walk past the churchyard. The moonlight catches on simple graves, the air thick with silence. Yet there's no sense of horror, just calm acceptance. Each stone, each mound of earth, is a reminder that life is fleeting, precious, and worth savoring. And as you return home, the thought settles in, even if your name fades. The rhythm of daily life carries on. Generations rise, fall, and replace one another. But the fields are still plowed, bread still baked, stories still told. Life goes on. Even after the curtain falls, you pull your blanket tighter, eyes heavy. Tomorrow, we'll wander through one final day in this medieval village. And then, gently, we'll drift back into our own time. The morning feels softer now, as though the village itself knows this is your last day here. The cock crows, but even his cry seems gentler. And when you step outside, the air holds a certain stillness. The mud, the smoke, the chatter, all the familiar things are still there. But you look at them with a new awareness. You've walked through the fields, shared in meals, listened to gossip, laughed at plays, even stood at the edge of the graveyard. And now you get to see it all woven together in one ordinary, extraordinary day. The baker is already at his oven, sweat glistening on his brow as the smell of bread wafts through the street. A child darts past you with a loaf clutched under his arm, his giggles echoing. The blacksmith hammers rhythmically, sparks flying, while his apprentice pumps the bellows. Women cluster by the well, buckets banging, gossip flowing like the water itself. It's the same rhythm you've seen before. Yet now you recognize the harmony. Every person, every role keeps the village alive. Here's your mainstream. Historical fact: medieval villages operated on a communal system, with each member contributing according to their trade or ability. Cooperation was survival, and even the smallest task, mending clothes. Herding geese, fetching firewood, was essential. A quirky tidbit slips in as you wander. One neighbor swears, rubbing onions on your forehead cures headaches, while another insists carrying bread in your pocket wards off evil spirits. Neither seems particularly scientific, but hey, you've seen stranger remedies. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier? Yeah, maybe onions aren't so bad. At midday, the church bell rings, its sound rolling over the fields. The entire community pauses, some crossing themselves, others simply using the break to stretch aching backs. Time itself feels measured not by clocks, but by bells, seasons, and the cycles of planting and harvest. Historians still argue whether life in the Middle Ages was relentlessly hard or surprisingly content. On one hand, hunger, disease, and danger shadowed every family. On the other, villagers found joy in music, feasts, play, and faith. Perhaps like now, happiness depended less on circumstance than on connection, the warmth of neighbors, the comfort of routine, the hope of something greater. Evening falls, and you find yourself at the tavern once more. The fire crackles, ale mugs clink, and the laughter is easy. A minstrel sings a tune about a knight and his ridiculous donkey, and the crowd howls. You sip, you smile, and you realize these people so far, removed by centuries, aren't so different from you. They worry, they hope, they laugh, they dream. The details change, but the heartbeat of humanity, it's timeless. As the embers dim, you step outside. The stars blaze across the dark sky, clearer and brighter than in any city of your own time. No streetlights, no engines, just the hush of night, the rustle of wind, and the slow breath of the village asleep. You walk home to your little straw bed one last time, the whispers of this medieval world wrapping around you like a blanket. Tomorrow, when you wake, you'll be back in your own world, modern comforts. Electric lights, the endless scroll of news feeds. But a part of you will carry this place always. The smell of bread, the crackle of torches, the laughter in the tavern, and the knowledge that even centuries ago, ordinary people found beauty in their ordinary days. And now, as your eyes close, let's drift gently into the wind down. The night is deep now, and the village grows still. The chatter has faded, the hammers have gone quiet, and the last embers of the hearths glow softly in the dark. You hear only the faint hush of the wind moving through the thatched roofs, the occasional lowing of a cow settling into sleep, and the rhythmic pulse of your own breathing. You picture the fields lying, fallow under the starlight, the church steeple silhouetted against the moon, and the quiet rows of cottages, each one holding families wrapped in slumber. Everything has slowed, softened, and become safe. The worries of harvests, the noise of gossip, even the weight of mortality itself, they've all hushed into silence. Your own body feels heavier now, sinking deeper into the bed beneath you. Your thoughts grow looser, like threads slipping free. The images of the day, the laughter at the tavern, the music on the green, the warmth of bread in your hands float gently past. And you don't need to hold on. Just let them drift. The world of the Middle Ages begins to fade. Not abruptly, but like a candle slowly guttering out. Shadows lengthen, stars soften, and the night enfolds you. You're safe here, wrapped in calm, the gentle hum of time carrying you forward. Breathe in, breathe out. Feel yourself settling into stillness, into ease. The curtain has closed on the story, but your own rest is just beginning. Let your body release, let your mind quiet, and let sleep take you kindly. Like the softest of blankets, sweet dreams.